And then say again, welcome. So I think everybody knows me. I'm Kathy Kuntz, the director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change. And welcome to this Sustainable Leaders Collaborative webinar with WISDOT. We're super excited that WISDOT is joining us today to talk about the Beltline expansion planning PEL project they've been working on and the public comment opportunities for that. I'm going to have the WISDOT folks, Jeff, and Michelle, introduce themselves.
All right. Hello, everybody. I am Jeff Behrens. I am the project manager for WISDOT on the Beltline PEL study. I've been with DOT 26 years and have been working on major studies similar to the Beltline PEL study for a little over half that time.
And good morning, my name is Michelle Howe. I am the WISDOT Major Studies Supervisor, so I oversee major studies in our Southwest Region office.
And I'm Jeff Held with Strand Associates. I'm the consultant project manager on the Beltline study and been with Strand 26 years also. Didn't know we had the same tenure. And happy to be here today. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. And so my plan for us today was really to have a conversation. In the pre-materials, I kept sending you all the link to the really short, very succinct WISDOT summary of the Beltline study. I'm thinking you're here because you are familiar and you have questions. And so my thought is to really just open it up to discussion, and maybe I'll start with the first question, and then you can raise your hands, you can put questions in the chat. I intentionally moved this from an official webinar to a meeting at the last minute so that you could all more easily interact with each other. So that's the plan. We will have questions. And my question to begin, so first, thanks again, Jeff, and Michelle for being willing to join us to talk about this study. I think one of the things that as I look through the materials and watch the video, it's clear that one of the priorities for WISDOT is being sensitive to local planning efforts. I think one of the things that strikes me in this case is that in the last couple of years, a lot of our communities have adopted goals around reducing VMTs. And I know this study has a long history and it started way before any of those plans happened. And I'm wondering if one of you can talk a little bit about how in the course of that planning, are you constantly going back and looking at new plans and communities, or how does that work? How do we facilitate that working, maybe?
Yeah, as part of any study that we do, one of the things that we look to do is get local plans and review them. We get the most current ones that are out there, and we look at what the different community goals are and figure out, how our project aligns with them in some cases, may not align with them in some cases. And, we try to come up with alternatives that are compatible with the local plans to the extent possible. And big part of that too is that, we get that information, and then we also have a lot of different public outreach with the local municipalities and different groups as well to kind of get that feedback. And that all becomes a part of the decision-making process as we develop a range of alternatives. So we do look to get the latest and greatest local plans and find out what those goals are and incorporate them to the extent practicable in the different alternatives.
And is that mostly the comprehensive plans that you're getting?
We do get the comprehensive plans, but then we do look for any additional plans. And again, that's where some of the outreach with, we have different committees, technical advisory committees, policy advisory committees, with elected officials and staff from different municipalities to kind of facilitate the feedback back and forth. And if there are other plans that they would bring up that we're not aware of during those types of meetings, we get those and take those into account as well. And Jeff, I think you were going to add something.
I was just going to add that I think that the goals and objectives for the PEL are influenced by the local plans. There was quite a process. And admittedly, it's been a number of years back now since those were developed, but it was developed in collaboration with a lot of local representatives. And you'll notice that they are very multimodal in nature. They talk about accessibility in addition to just mobility. And so I think that's one way local plans have influenced the PEL to date. They are always changing and being updated, of course. Plans are always evolving. And so I think there's always opportunity to continue working on those moving forward. And as we move into the next phase, the next phase for the Beltline will be NEPA analysis. There'll be an opportunity to shape the purpose and need with input from the local plans as well. The purpose and need will be sort of the update to the Beltline PEL goals and objectives.
I just put up on the share the 12 Beltline PEL objectives so that folks could see those from that presentation. Yeah, that's very helpful. Jeff, do you have a sense, have local communities been sharing their sustainability or climate action plans with you? Do you feel like you've gotten those as part of this project?
Yeah, I would say that we have. We've gotten a lot of feedback from communities throughout the study, and a lot of concern about the potential for additional lanes and what that will do, greenhouse gases and those kinds of things. So we're always looking for more input, but to date we have received a lot of feedback from the different municipalities throughout the corridor.
Yeah, I think so. And we're aware that the communities are discussing the Beltline. It impacts a lot of constituencies and a lot of communities. And, we're continuing to monitor that. And we're aware of Fitchburg's resolution that they passed opposing expansion of the Beltline. I do want to say, I'm sure that most folks have seen the public meeting and that sort of thing, but the PEL is coming to an end, but the next step is going to be NEPA studies. And the primary goal of the PEL is to recommend what should go into the range of alternatives for those future NEPA studies. It's not a proposal for what to construct. And so just important context to have there. But we definitely are hearing from a lot of folks and taking that into account. We'll have a summary of the feedback we've received in the final PEL summary report, and that'll be a jumping off point for the next studies along the Beltline.
Yeah, and I think just to jump on Jeff's comment, one of the I think misconceptions, and we were talking earlier, we've received a lot of feedback from this last public outreach. One of the bigger misconceptions that people seem to have is that we have the preferred strategy package within the PEL study, and as Jeff alluded to, that is not what we're promoting for future construction. That's different individual improvements along the Beltline that we are proposing would move forward into the future NEPA study, and they would be used then to develop a range of alternatives within NEPA that would be evaluated in more detail. So there very well may be options that would look at potential capacity expansion. But there will be options that don't have capacity expansion as well. We're going to look at a range of alternatives. And so just to get that out there, just kind of jump on what Jeff said, that's not what we're proposing to construct. They're the pieces that we feel warrant further evaluation.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful clarification for folks, because the connection between what's in the preferred strategy and what then is in the next phase, I think, speaking maybe for myself, it was concerning to see that the adding a general purpose lane, because I have a lot of goals around vehicle miles traveled, and we're making actual progress on that in the county. Okay. There is a question in the chat. Is there room within the existing corridor to actually expand the Beltline?
In certain places, there is. In some places, like east of Verona Road, we do anticipate there will be impacts. And Jeff, you can jump on this afterwards. The thing is, at this point, we know there will likely be some impacts. We don't know what the extent of those are, or if there could be design modifications that could minimize those. And that's kind of why one of the reasons, in addition to potential operational benefits, that we are proposing that capacity expansion would get looked at as a possible option in future NEPA studies. We want to get into those details and identify what exactly those impacts would be. But Jeff, I don't know if you want to.
I think that summarizes it pretty well. I mean, west of Verona Road, there's room to expand into the center, whether that would be through a flex lane or a +1 general purpose lane. East of Verona Road, it's more challenging. There's going to be impacts, certainly with added capacity. And again, that'll be a key focus of the NEPA study. We'll be understanding those trade-offs, the impacts versus the benefits. But yeah, so I guess that's the short answer.
Other questions from folks? This is not a shy group. Come on, I'm sure. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah. Jeff, explain again for the group why transit is not an option. Level of service F starts at about 45 vehicles per mile, which is like 75 people, which is essentially one busload of people. Mm-hmm. The DOT traffic count map shows that all of the traffic, not all, but 90% of the traffic or more is local traffic, people going back and forth within the corridor. Why would transit not be a valid option?
But do you want me to do or you want to jump in right away?
Well, I would say, so there's a couple different elements regarding transit. So transit along the Beltline itself, so buses on the Beltline, that was investigated early on in the study, and it was not found to be particularly effective. You're correct that a lot of the trips are short on the Beltline. We've got statistics from origin destination studies from quite a while ago, but a lot of people do jump on the Beltline, go an exit or two and jump off. A lot of that traffic, though, is still oriented outside of Madison heading downtown. They're just kind of switching the spoke that they're using to get downtown. So the PEL study is focused more on transit improvements through the interchanges, which we think has more value. We always the department looks to the locals in terms of transit planning. And so I think currently for Madison, that really revolves around the bus rapid transit system. The east-west route is open and running, and north-south is in planning. And so this study has focused more on helping getting the buses through the interchanges on the routes that they're planning to use, that Metro wants to use. So I guess that's
yeah. I think that kind of sums it up, Bill. Like we as DOT tend to look for the locals and what the locals' plans are for transit, and look to incorporate that within our studies. With the Madison MPO, their latest plan, BRT is kind of what they're focusing on. So we've worked with Madison Metro to, like Jeff said, look at where those routes are crossing the Beltline and how we could facilitate transit through there, make it more efficient. So that's kind of where we're at with that. And Michelle, I don't know if you wanted to add anything. I know you've done some research related to that as well.
No, I think that kind of hit the main point. So essentially, DOT is going to look to locals when it comes to how transit is prioritized in an area. We may get more involved when we're talking about intercity connections, so like connecting larger communities. That's where we can maybe bridge the gap and be more involved. But really, the locals like the MPO, they're the ones that best understand the priorities and what they want to focus on. And then, like when we were talking about those local plans, we just look to work with those through our different committees and different stakeholder meetings to understand those and try to facilitate those as best we can within our projects.
Because the locals are the ones that would implement it and run it once it's in place.
Right.
So just to kind of close that a little bit in my thinking, I mean, that means one of the things that's evolving as you're doing this study is the increased number of local municipalities who are opting into Madison Metro, and the fact that, there's more routes to Sun Prairie now, and there might the Monona piece, and that if that continues to spread in some ways, that that is a way that this project going forward could be affected
Yep.
if
Yeah,
more of that happens.
we met with representatives from Metro Transit, I don't know, a few weeks ago, a month ago, after they reviewed the PEL summary report, and we're like, well, a few things have changed here and there, and so they're going to get us their comments. We're going to look to potentially make changes to our recommendations based on that feedback. And again, as things would move into NEPA, that relationship would still stay and evolve. The different alternatives could evolve based on changes that occur.
I'll say
Okay.
also the network redesign occurred a couple years back, and we did look at that, and we changed the recommendations for transit priority at the different locations along the Beltline, so that impacted it. And we're very aware of Mineral Point Road and Fish Hatchery Road being the BRT routes as well.
Okay. Okay. That's like super helpful to know that you're having that conversation with them. Greg, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I have a couple of questions, but I'll just first one, and then I'll let other people get into the space. I'm curious. Thank you for coming and illuminating a little bit about this to us here. I appreciate your time. I'm curious if you could, I can't remember the sort of breakdown in cost sharing based on modes of transportation. If I can't, I don't know if you guys have that capacity to like illuminate a little bit. I know that, for instance, often sort of lane expansions and things are, and kind of capacity expansions are pretty kind of fully covered by DOT, but then some amount of cost sharing is happening for, say, transit, walking, and biking infrastructure, and the DOT is a kind of a partner in some of those improvements based on kind of what each local government is looking to do perhaps at each intersection. Could you remind me kind of what those cost sharing percentages are with local governments on certain infrastructure upgrades?
I know Michelle put together a one pager, actually more than one pager on all this as we went through it with our Stoughton Road North study. So I'm going to let Michelle talk.
Yeah, and I'll say that it's somewhat case specific, so I can't just tell you that it's exactly this for all scenarios. And so the process that we follow, we both start there, is that as we get into NEPA and we look at alternatives, what we're doing with municipalities is letting them know, all right, these are the potential cost share associated with those. That way, when they're making decisions on what, they're stating their preferences, et cetera, they have a better understanding of what, local funds might be associated with that. I'll give a few examples. I'll do a pedestrian bridge as an example. So there are different ranges of cost share for that based on, if there's documented plans, we talked about those. If there's already plans that we'd like to have a facility for bike ped here, and we see that value in the connectivity of a network, and then we have more justification, then there is less local cost share. And so it is a process that goes back and forth. That's an example. You're in pedestrians, we fully fund, all ADA updates. We need to make sure that we're meeting all the ADA accommodations on sidewalks and paying for those, for example, less applicable on the Beltline. But there are certainly many things fully funded, and what we work to do is just work with the municipality early in that NEPA phase to better alert them to what the cost share potentials are and work through that as we select a preferred alternative. So if you have more specific questions, I can try to answer those, but it's not necessarily like X, Y, and Z are the cost share for each item.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add one other is related to bike lanes. So we fully pay for on-street bike lanes, but then we can do some cost equivalencies for other bike facilities. So for example, if a shared use path is desired instead on a local road, we could take the cost that it would cost to build bike lanes and put that towards a shared use path. So that's where it's, again, not black and white, but we have different ways to try to, within what our established guidelines are and how we can accommodate some different options.
And for this corridor, that would really come into play at the interchanges, the roads crossing. You've probably noticed we've got new local road connections and crossings as part of the components that are in there. Those would all be accommodate bikes and pedestrians. If WSDOT were to construct those, or there'd be the cost share to construct those, they would certainly have full ped and bike accommodations.
And one of the things you're emphasizing, Michelle, is what is kind of written in plans versus thought about somewhere. So as this all continues to move forward, that's a thing for local governments to think about, that having some of that solidified makes it easier to work with WSDOT on these issues.
Yeah, I'll give an example. Jeff mentioned Stoughton Road North, which is the corridor from 30 up to the interstate on the east side of town, and a pedestrian bridge is planned just south of 30. And that was documented in county plans, local plans, MPO. That preferred crossing as part of a larger network has been identified in several plans. And that certainly helped in those discussions on including it in the project and the cost share of it.
Terrific. Greg, you said you had more than one question. I'm not seeing other hands, so I'm going to let you go again.
Thank you, Kathy. And stop me from dominating the meeting. It's good. No, my other question, I mean, I know that this is the whole point of NEPA is to get into the details about impacts, but I'm curious if at this point, I had heard some ballparks on kind of the impacts of the project and how much potentially it could cost for expansion, but that was, I mean, that must have been pre-COVID, so it's been years because this project's been going on for a long time. So understanding that you're not in the NEPA documentation, and that is the point of that process, I'm still curious if there is any sort of ballpark estimate on the impacts on, like perhaps if there were to be an expansion versus to not do so, just like in terms of how much the project would cost, and if you have thoughts on either like the number of businesses that could potentially be impacted, or any sort of kind of other, because obviously it goes to Arboretum, and then there's also, you know, a lot of wetland implications as well. So it's a challenging project. And so, anyway, I'm just curious if you could illuminate on any of that, if that's been a kind of
we do, and I believe it's within in the summary report. We did go through and assess with some of the expansion and crossings what we thought could be potential relocations. Realize that we are at the very early planning stages, no detailed design. So that is within the PEL summary report. That was one of the factors that we went through with our different committees and showed at public involvement meetings when we prioritized the different components, those, you know, crossings here and there. A component is just a different potential improvement. It could be adding a lane, adding a new crossing, adding a bicycle pedestrian connection, those types of things. We're calling them components. So that was one of the factors that we used to kind of rank those. And the components that were on, we used primarily 4 different criteria. The ones that were kind of on the lower end, some of those ended up getting eliminated. But there is some of that information in the PEL study report related to the costs. We don't have anything in there. At this point, just being as preliminary as we are, we don't want to throw a number out there for what it could potentially be. We'd really rather get further on in the design process. And then another thing that it gets back to what I was saying earlier, where the preferred strategy package is not what we're proposing to construct. You know, if you were to do everything within that preferred strategy package that we have, you know, you're hundreds of millions of dollars to construct all that. However, those are the pieces that we want to make up the range of alternatives. And, you know, when we get into NEPA, we will do that. We'll probably have some higher mobility type options that may add capacity expansion, and we'll have lower build options, and we'll come up with a cost there. I don't know, anybody have anything else to add related to that?
I think that's pretty well said. We're very high level at this point, and have talked a little bit more in sort of relative differences between these different combinations of components, these different strategy packages, as we've called them. We assess them really more from a relative difference than getting into the details.
Got it. And we have another question in the chat regarding the GP lane, general purpose lane component. How do you measure congestion reduction? Studies show highway expansion is associated with traffic increases due to induced demand, with any benefits diminished within a few years.
Sure.
Yeah, Jeff's a traffic engineer. I'll let him take the first crack at this one.
Well, so specifically to measuring congestion, I mean, the performance measures that we've considered in the alternatives evaluation so far are the typical level of service. We've looked at some travel times. We also try to assess impact on safety. Not a lot of that has been done to this point in the PEL. That would be further explored in NEPA, but that's a big component that factors into this. The second part was about VMT, was it? What was the second part of the question?
It was just that often congestion increases because there's more, you added a lane, more people drive.
Sure, induced demand. Yep. So
latent demand.
Yeah. So we've the forecasts that were used for this study, they don't really consider induced demand in terms of people changing their residential location preferences, people living farther from work because there's a highway that works better. That's not well captured in the current forecasts. And it's a tricky thing to quantify, but there are tools out there that have been developed. When NEPA comes around, these forecasts will be completely redeveloped, and WSDOT is always striving to improve their processes. So that's something that will be looked at that time. The forecasts do account for latent demand, which is basically people that would avoid the Beltline if it was congested. They'd use a different route, but they would travel on the Beltline if it flowed better. That's pretty well captured in the modeling because of the travel demand model that the MPO maintains. So those two things sort of overlap sometimes, but to be fair, induced demand has not been directly accounted for so far. That said, we did do an indirect and cumulative impacts assessment. We had a panel that was put together of local planners and experts and asked about those types of impacts. We did get a little bit of feedback about certain areas that might grow more quickly if the Beltline were to have more capacity, if a lane was to be added. So that's documented in the PSR as well. But it's an issue that would have to be looked at in more detail and further assessed in NEPA. The federal and the state requirements for things like induced demand, greenhouse gas analysis, those types of things are kind of always changing. We were talking about funding before the call started here, and the landscapes change as administrations change, and it will be dependent on what WSDOT is allowed to study as well. But I think the idea would be to take a fresh look when NEPA starts and to use all the best tools available. Yeah,
well, and I think just the analysis that we've done now with the forecast that we have, we look out to 2050. And the forecast now with adding an additional lane based on the analysis, the modeling that we have completed to this point, it does show that does provide a benefit out to 2050 and beyond for congestion along the Beltline. Again, understanding that the travel demand model where we get used for our forecast doesn't necessarily do a good job with induced demand. But again, as we move forward and into NEPA, we'll redo those forecasts again. We'll redo our traffic modeling with the latest and greatest numbers. We'll go out and get traffic counts, and we'll complete our modeling again at that time and see how things shake out.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. Thank you. Bob, your hand is up.
Okay, thank you. This may seem like a silly question, but there's a lot of sincerity behind it. Has the state looked at the effects of the speeds that are driven on the Beltline? And what I'm talking about, it's posted 55 miles an hour. We all know that a lot of people go 55, but some people go 90 or 100. Have you looked at the impacts on how the road functions because of those variances in the speeds that are being driven?
Yeah, I would say that we haven't necessarily done a specific analysis of that, but I would say that you are correct.
We're aware of that, yeah.
In that exists, and also that speed differential is a problem. I mean, that's a safety issue. When you've got one lane traveling a lot faster than another, or certain cars traveling a lot faster than others, it is an issue. I know the department works with law enforcement for enforcement activities out there, and there has been an increase in that I've noticed, but it's challenging on the Beltline.
Yeah, it is challenging on the Beltline. I think one of the things that we received, I don't know if I'd say several, but we have received some comments about get the speed limit up on the Beltline to 65 miles per hour, which I wasn't necessarily expecting, but it gets kind of to your point. I think that you've got some people that 55 is the speed limit. That's what I'm driving, and majority of people drive what they feel comfortable driving out there, which is above 55. And then you've got the people that just don't care and go as fast as they can. And that's something that, I don't know, it has been talked about raising the speed limit on the Beltline. However, with how close some of those interchanges are out there, you got Rimrock and Seminole, and the weaving going in and out where it currently is, along with some geometric deficiencies as far as there's places in the Beltline where the road isn't designed for 65 miles an hour. Those are some of the reasons that DOT hasn't entertained it to this point. Now, in a future NEPA study, one of the things that we might look at is correcting that stuff, or we would look at it, see what the impacts would be. And then maybe there would be the potential, if we could address those issues, that you could look at a higher speed limit out there, maybe get some more consistency. That's something that we would have to evaluate down the road.
So I'm going to just follow up on that. Help me understand, Jeff and Jeff, on a thing like that. So thinking about, well, what if the speed limit went up on the Beltline? And you mentioned, the rules about what's in NEPA and what's not in NEPA are always changing. I mean, when I think about people driving faster, I think about higher emissions because it's less efficient and in a full NEPA analysis, is there still at this point an assessment of the emissions impacts of all the options, or does it look like you're not gonna even have that in the NEPA you do for the next couple of years? Do you have a sense of that yet?
Well, we've talked about that.
Yeah.
So there's a couple. There's kind of two different things. There's mobile source air toxics, MSATs, and that has more to do. And I'm thinking the WSDOT folks have kind of helped us with this, but so MSATs have more to do with local health issues. It's more about diesel particulates, those types of things. And then there's greenhouse gases, which is more of a climate and a global thing. Currently, MSATs would still be something that would be required to be studied. There'd be an air quality analysis as part of NEPA. Greenhouse gases is a little less clear. And it would depend on both the federal requirements and the state requirements at the time of NEPA.
Yeah, I think people on this call are probably aware that there were some executive orders related to greenhouse gases that came out, and Federal Highway Administration, that's not something that they look at related to different transportation projects anymore. And DOT, the state, doesn't have any direct guidance related to greenhouse gases at this point. So where things are currently at now, I don't know that we would look to undertake a greenhouse gas analysis like we would have before that most recent executive order came out from the current administration. That being said, we do acknowledge, or we do know related to the Beltline, that there are local goals related to reduction of greenhouse gases. So I think that's something that as we get to the NEPA process, if we're hearing from the local communities that this is something they feel very strongly about, I think the conversation could be had with DOT and some of our management on would it make sense? It'd be more of a case by case basis, but as far as like broadband, that's not something that DOT is currently looking at this point, because doing that analysis is not going to factor into Federal Highway Administration's decision to approve our environmental document.
Right.
That makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, Jeff. I really appreciate the way you laid that out, because it tells me that it's important for the local governments who have climate goals to be working with WISDOT to say, okay, how will we create specific to this project a NEPA that is sensitive to those local goals, whether those are expressed in, and having read lots of local climate and sustainability plans, sometimes they're expressed in greenhouse gas emissions, sometimes they're expressed in vehicle miles traveled, and sometimes they're expressed in that broader sort of air quality in our community. So, so there's a mix, but ultimately you're kind of talking, I don't know, there are 8 or 9 communities now with plans that probably most of which are adjacent to the Beltline at some point. It seems to me maybe Wanakee and Sun Prairie are the only 2 that are a little bit further away, but connected in a way. So that's like super helpful. And Bill, I see your hand up. You also have a question in the chat that's long, and I'm going to let you ask it live so that I don't have to stumble through reading it.
Well, the reason I raised my hand was I was wondering about, Bob had brought up speed limit, and there was talk of potentially, what would happen if you raised the speed limit on the Beltline. And I guess that, as well as just adding another travel lane, would also increase the ambient noise. And I'm wondering, within NEPA, do they have any requirements about noise levels, which impact not only humans but also wildlife? And then I guess adjacent to that, are we concerned with wildlife crossings of the Beltline?
So yeah, and I guess one thing, Bill, before we go any further, I'm not my comment about potentially raising the Beltline or the speed limit on the Beltline. That's not something that we're necessarily looking
Sure.
at doing. Obviously, we would want input from the communities on that if we were to move forward with it. It's just I wanted to referencing the previous question that we have gotten comments from people related to that. But within NEPA, yes, for the type of project that the Beltline is, we would be required to do a noise analysis, and we would look at what the impacts of noise would be at different receptors throughout the corridor. I guess I should say, depending on what our range of alternatives is along the Beltline, yeah. But very likely we'd be doing a noise analysis and determine if a mitigation like a noise barrier is reasonable or feasible. There's criteria that are laid out. I don't have it off the top of my head that would let us know, yes, a noise barrier is reasonable and feasible. And then if it is, we would talk with the people that are affected. We call them receptors, and they would vote on whether or not they wanted to put in or have a noise wall installed as part of a project. So for instance, a neighborhood, very well likely the people would vote yes, they would want to, the majority of them. Whereas if you had a bunch of businesses, they would be like, no, we don't want a noise wall blocking visibility of our businesses. So that is something that would be looked at in future NEPA studies. As far as wildlife crossings, that's not something that I'm aware of. I don't know if before my time, but that we've talked about at this point. That being said, it's certainly something that as we get into NEPA could be evaluated.
think we'd probably look at the crash data related to that. I'm not aware of there being an issue. But
Or if there's endangered species or anything
well,
like
certainly
that.
we'll look at
you know.
that. We'll look at
But-
that type of impact as well in NEPA.
Yeah, I think I'll
Yeah, I
add
guess
DNR.
oh, go ahead.
Often our coordination with the DNR, they'll identify things like that. I've worked on, for example, like a culvert where they've identified some additional work that's needed to facilitate species. So I think it's often coming from DNR coordination on what priorities they see for wildlife.
Okay. I guess I was specifically noting that there's portions of the Arboretum on both sides of the Beltline, and I imagine there's wildlife that would, want to occupy both the north and the south portions of the Beltline.
Yep. Yeah.
So I guess switching gears then, and kind of circling back to my first question, since the study has dismissed transit as a standalone strategy, how much did you look into traffic demand management, maybe something like a van pool as a primary alternative to adding general purpose lanes? Something like that would be, faster to implement, lower operating costs, and eligible for federal funding.
Yeah, so we did look at a standalone strategy that would it didn't specifically get at necessarily travel demand management, but the result we assessed was whether if we were able to achieve, if as a community we were able to achieve 3 times the existing bicycle and pedestrian travel, how would that impact conditions on the Beltline? And it did not have a significant impact on the traffic using the Beltline. It's got a lot of other benefits. So that was also dismissed as a standalone strategy. Now you can see included in the preferred strategy package, in all of the range of strategy packages that we considered, there's a lot of multimodal improvements included, and that's to help us meet our goals. But we didn't see travel demand management would be a strategy to try to get at, increasing the mode split, essentially. We didn't see that viable as a standalone strategy. Now, it's not to say there's not value in that, and I know that the MPO works very hard on promoting travel demand management and creating programs to make it easier for people to choose other modes. I guess I would say that's how we handled travel demand management, I suppose, in this study.
And I'll add to that, like Jeff mentioned, so we're familiar with the round trip program that the MPO has. We've met with the MPO and worked on how we might be able to market the program that they're doing within the work we're doing. So for example, they've attended a public meeting that we've had where they have a table, they can talk through what their program is and just try to help sell that program. It can be available during construction. I think they're using it on the John Nolan project as an example where they're so we're working with the MPO on ways we can educate our stakeholders and our public involvement about their programs, even if it's not directly part of our project. So still connecting those pieces together.
Thank you. Other questions? I'm not seeing other hands or other things. We're having some, just so I say this out loud for people watching the video later if they don't see the chat. Bob was not really advocating for increasing the speed limit. He thinks it's fine at 55. I think we've got multiple people sort of feeling like, faster is not better. I'd never thought, Jeff, about your point about how close the interchanges are to each other that seems to me to be like a really good argument for keeping it at 55, that it's simply not safe for everyone to be driving 70 and
Right.
coming on and off as quickly as you do. When we live here for a long time, you become used to how to move around the Beltline, but there's still a cohort of people who are brand new and it's a challenge.
Yep. It's really not a road that was meant to be built for speeds higher than 55 with that interchange spacing, and some of the other horizontal curves are not really set up for higher speeds in some places. So
the challenges we've gone to such higher speeds on other roads, people just, yeah, start to think that this is where they live. And I say that as someone who's, I grew up in North Dakota. I'm used to people driving super fast because there's no one else on the road and it's flat for 100 miles kind of thing. With that, it seems like we do not have more questions. I guess I want to thank everyone for doing this. Thank you, Jeff, and Michelle for joining us. This was for me, it was super helpful. I'm much clearer on where we are in this process and how the pieces fit together. Again, comments are due at this point. They are due next week, January 15th. There may be an update on that, but I'm not going to be the spoiler, and but get your comments in by next week, January 15th.
Well, I think, Kathy, it's fair to say we're definitely going to extend that comment period to January 31st, the end of January. We've been getting a lot of comments in. We want to keep them coming in. We want feedback. So we are going to extend that comment period.
Okay, awesome. So it's gonna, and Jeff, we have a note that on the website it says the comments are due in 2025, not 2026. So when you update
Is that on the website? Oh, geez.
31st, you want to say 2026 so that
okay. Thank you for
the proofreaders among us can. I didn't notice that. I just who knows what year it is anymore. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone else who's here. Again, we'll post this, we'll share it out to the SLC. Again, Jeff, and Michelle, this was very helpful. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.